My name is Nora Vance, and I was 36 years old the night my fiancé's family tried to make me disappear for the price of my own signature. It happened at the rehearsal dinner, in the private dining room of a country club, with 60 guests watching, when my future mother-in-law slid a folded document across the white tablecloth and said, loud enough for the back tables to hear, that I should sign it and disappear quietly, because I was a gold digger who had brought nothing to this family. I read every line of it. I picked up the pen, and they all leaned in, certain they knew exactly how this ended. They thought the folder sitting in front of me was empty. What I did next, with that pen already in my hand, and why my father-in-law at the far end of the table came halfway up out of his chair, is the part not one of those 60 people ever saw coming. Before I take you back there, I want to say something to you directly, because this next hour is going to matter to somebody watching, and it might be you. If you have ever been made to feel small by people who owed you the most, if you have ever sat quietly at a table where your welcome came with conditions, then you are exactly who I am telling this to. So do something for me before we go on, subscribe to this channel, and stay with me all the way to the end, because this story only makes sense if you see how it finishes, and the people who leave early always leave at the exact moment they should have stayed. And if this reaches you the way I hope it does, drop one comment for me. Just 3 words. Type, forged, not given. Because by the time we're done, you'll understand why those are the only 3 words that matter. Now let me take you back to a workshop, a steel rose, and everything I taught myself to hide. I own a company called Vance Ironworks, structural steel and custom metal fabrication, the kind of work nobody photographs and nobody thinks about until the railing they are leaning on holds. 14 years ago it was one rented bay, a used welder I bought on credit, and me sweeping my own floor at midnight because I could not afford to pay anyone else to do it. Now it is a fabrication shop that takes up half a city block, 90 people on the payroll, and contracts across 4 counties. The staircases in the new courthouse are mine. The beams holding up the hospital's new wing are mine. When an architect draws something beautiful and impossible, someone eventually has to figure out how to make it stand up, and more in this part of the state, that someone is me. That business made me a wealthy woman, though you would never guess it to look at me. I drive a 15-year-old truck with rust starting along the wheel wells. I wear the same canvas work jackets I wore when I was 22 and broke, the cuffs burned through in places from sparks. My hands are rough and there is a permanent gray line under 2 of my nails that no amount of scrubbing takes out, because I still get under a project myself when a job runs behind. Money, for me, has always been something you build quietly and then never mention. I learned that young, and I learned it the hard way. Every single time someone in my life found out what I actually had, something shifted in their face. The math started behind their eyes. The asking followed a little while after. Friends turned into people with an opportunity they wanted to run past me. A man I once loved told me I made him feel like less, and then spent a year making sure I felt like less right back. So I got very good at looking like a woman with nothing. I paid for things without flinching, and let people assume the flinch was there. I told myself it was humility. The truth is, it was armor. I had learned that the fastest way to lose people was to let them see how much you had, and for most of my life that armor did exactly what I built it to do. The armor started with my grandfather. Everybody called him Pop, even people who had no business calling him anything. He raised me after my mother could not, and he was a welder and an ornamental ironworker, which is a fancy way of saying he made the gates and railings and window guards that people with money put on the front of houses they did not build themselves. He worked with his hands until they looked like they were made of the same material as the iron. He never once acted like the work made him less than the men who signed his checks. When I was small and I complained that we did not have the things other kids had, he would take me out to the little forge behind the shop, and he would heat a scrap of steel until it glowed, and he would work it while I watched. And one evening he hammered out a small steel rose, petal by petal, from a piece of rebar somebody had thrown away, and he pressed it still warm into my hand, and told me something I did not understand until much later. Worth isn't handed to you at somebody's table, he said. It's forged. You make it yourself, out of whatever they throw away, And once you've made it, nobody on this earth can slide it back across the table and call it nothing. He died when I was 20. He left me almost nothing anybody could put a number on. He left me that steel rose. I started the company 2 years after we buried him, with the rose sitting on the windowsill of that first rented bay, and I have carried it to every important day of my life since. It rode in my jacket pocket the day I signed my first contract that had 6 figures on it. It was in my pocket the day I made the final payment on the loan that nearly killed the business in year 3. It still has the faint marks of his hammer on the pedals, and I know every one of them by touch. I built everything I have with my own 2 hands, because the man who raised me showed me how. That is the part the Sterlings could never have imagined, sitting in their club with their names still carved into the old bank building downtown. They believed a person's value came stamped on them at birth, handed down like a set of silver. Pop taught me it came up out of the fire, and you made it yourself, or you went without. I met Julian Sterling on a Thursday night in an empty elementary school, at 9 o'clock, with my hood down and a broken handrail glowing under my torch. There was a spring concert the next morning, and a bracket on the main stairwell railing had sheared clean through, and the district had called us in a panic because a child could put a hand on it and go straight down a flight of concrete steps. So there I was, alone in a dark school, fixing something so that other people's kids would be safe, when a man came out of a classroom down the hall carrying a stack of sheet music and a thermos, and stopped when he saw the sparks. He did not ask me what I did for a living, not exactly. He watched me finish the weld, and when I flipped my hood up and wiped my face, the first thing he asked me was what I listened to when I worked. I told him, and he lit up like I had said something remarkable, and he named a record I loved, and we stood there in that empty hallway arguing about whether the third song ruined the whole thing or made it, until the janitor came around with his keys and had to let us both out. Julian taught music at that school. Band and orchestra, the programs everybody's budget cuts first. He had come in late to fix a broken music stand himself, because no teacher was paid to do that either. He wore a coat with a button that did not match the others, and did not seem to notice or care. And he looked at me the way I was not used to being looked at, not like a set of numbers he was quietly adding up, not like a woman he was deciding whether he could afford. He looked at me like I was interesting. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel the armor click into place. I gave him my number, which I almost never did, and I told myself it was because he had kind eyes and knew good music. The truth is, it was because he had spent 40 minutes with me and never once asked the question that always ruined it. He never asked me what I was worth. 2 years later, I finally understood why. In his world, that was a question you only asked about people you had already decided to keep out. I knew the name Sterling before I ever knew Julian. Everyone in the county did. It was cut into the stone lintel above the doors of the old First Merchants Bank downtown, the one that was a coffee shop now, and it was on a brass plaque in the wing of the hospital, and it hung under the oldest portraits in the county museum. Men in stiff collars, who had owned the shipping company and the warehouses along the river, back when the river still moved money. The Sterlings were what people around here meant when they said an old family, not rich in any way you could point at, exactly, but placed, settled. The kind of name that got you a table at the club without a reservation, and a nod from people who did not nod at just anyone. Julian carried it like a coat that had never quite fit him in the shoulders. He had walked away from the family orbit on purpose, taken the teaching job his mother thought was beneath the name, and built a small, quiet, honest life that belonged entirely to him. When he was with me, he seemed lighter, like a man who had finally set something heavy down on the floor and stepped away from it. "That's why I love you," he told me once, early on. "You have no idea who my family is, and you wouldn't care if you did." I laughed and told him he was right, and I mostly believed it. I did not care about the portraits or the plaque on the hospital wing, but even then I noticed how carefully he said my family, the way you might name a storm system out over the water, watching to see which way it would turn. I knew something was wrong when the laughter around me began to sound distant and distorted. He got quiet in a way he usually was not. Then he said a thing I filed away and did not understand for a long time. "There is nothing on earth more expensive," he said, "than a family that has run out of everything but its name." I thought it was just a sad, pretty line. I did not know yet that it was a warning. I did not know I was about to walk straight into the middle of the exact thing he was describing. The first family dinner was at the Sterling House, a big brick place on the good side of the lake that had clearly been something once, and was tired now in ways I noticed, and pretended not to. Eleanor Sterling met me at the door in pearls and a smile that could have scored glass. She held my hand a beat too long, looked at my clean but unremarkable coat, and asked me warmly whose gardens I kept. I told her I worked in metal, in fabrication. She said, "Oh, you mean you work at a fabrication company?" gently, the way you would correct a child who had used the wrong word, and the smile never moved a muscle. At dinner, Julian's sister Camilla leaned in with the bright interest of a woman running a survey. "And what does your family do?" she asked. "Are they local?" I told her my grandfather had raised me, and that he had passed. "Oh," Camilla said, and let the silence finish the sentence for her. They were kind the way a locked door is polished. Every question had a floor under it, and it was always the same floor. Where do you come from, and is it anywhere that matters? I sat there with a company that had built half the public buildings they drove past every day, all of it under my own name. And I said, "Oh, nowhere really." I let them believe the rusting truck in the drive was the whole story. Julian squeezed my hand under the table like he was proud of how gracefully I was taking it. I told myself I was being gracious. The truth is older and uglier than that. I was doing the thing I had always done. I was making myself smaller so they would not find a reason to send me away. I was auditioning, and I did not even understand yet that the part had already been cast, and not for me. Here is the thing I need you to understand, because otherwise none of what I let happen will make any sense to you. I did not want the Sterling's money. There was no money to want, though I did not know that yet. What I wanted was the table. I wanted to belong to something that had been standing before I got there, and would go on standing after I was gone. I grew up with a grandfather and a rented half of a duplex and no cousins at the holidays. There was no big loud family arguing about nothing over a turkey. I built a company because I was very, very good at building things out of nothing at all. But you cannot build a family out of nothing. A family, you have to be let into. So when Julian took me back to that same empty school parking lot on our anniversary, and got down on one knee in the cold with a plain gold ring he had saved 4 months of a music teacher's salary to buy, I did not think about his mother for even 1 second. I thought about a place to belong. I said yes before he had finished the question. I said yes to him, and in my heart I told myself I was also saying yes to them. To the portraits and the plaque and the Sunday dinners stretching out ahead of me for the rest of my life. That was the old wound talking, though I could not hear it as a wound back then. A woman who has spent her whole life standing outside a door will do almost anything to be waved inside. She will shrink, she will hide, she will sit there quietly and let people who owe her nothing decide, over drinks, whether she is good enough for a chair at their table. I said yes, and I drove home that night, happier than I had let myself be in years. I had no idea that I had just handed them the one thing they knew exactly how to use against me. Eleanor asked to see the ring, the way a jeweler asks to see a flaw. She turned my hand toward the window light, studied the plain gold band, and said, "How practical," in a tone that made practical the ugliest word in the language. And then she got to work. Within a week she had appointed herself the planner of a wedding I had not asked anyone to plan. It would be at the club, of course. The Sterlings had always married at the club. The guest list would be handled by her, personally, because there were people who simply had to be invited, people whose grandfathers had known Julian's grandfather. When I mentioned that I would like to invite my crew, the 90 people who had actually built my life with me, she smiled and said we would see about the space. Everything I wanted was a thing we would see about. Everything they wanted was already decided and inked before I opened my mouth. I watched a wedding that was supposed to be mine turn into a performance of a family I was permitted to attend but not to change. And I let it happen, because pushing back felt like handing them a reason. If you have ever sat at a table where your welcome came with a list of conditions, you already know the exact sound of that particular silence. The one where you swallow the thing you actually meant to say, and smile, and pass the potatoes. Stay with me here, because that silence is about to get very loud. And do me one small favor at this exact point in the story, because this is the moment people wander off, right when things get quiet before they turn. If you are still here, comment forged not given now, so I know which of you had the patience to stay for the part that counts. I told myself back then that I could earn my way in if I was just patient enough. I was about to learn that the door had never been built to be earned through. What came next were the tests. Nobody ever called them that, but that is what they were. Small, constant, and deniable. At the next dinner, Eleanor watched which glass I reached for, and corrected me with a flick of her eyes before my fingers even touched it. When I mentioned a film I loved, Camilla said, "Oh, that's fun," in the voice you use for a child's crayon drawing taped to a refrigerator. When I spoke at all, Eleanor developed a habit of waiting one beat, and then repeating what I had just said in slightly finer English, as if she were translating me for the rest of the room. I have sat across the table from men who tried to bury me alive in the fine print of a contract, and I have never in my life felt as managed as I felt at that dinner table. Every little correction carried the same message underneath it, patient and total. You are not one of us. You may visit, you may not stay. And the genius of it, the truly airtight cruelty of it, was that none of it was ever loud enough to name out loud. If I had turned to Julian and said, "Your mother has been insulting me all night," he could have said, honestly and with a straight face, "She was only talking about which glass is for water." That was the whole design. Death by 1,000 corrections, each one too small to bleed. I started dreading the drive out to the lake house. I, who had once told a county commissioner to his face exactly where he could file his lowball bid, started rehearsing sentences in the truck on the way over, trying to arrive as a woman they would not need to fix. I did not even notice it happening. That is how it works. It does not feel like disappearing. It feels like manners. It feels like love, even. It feels like the reasonable price of being let inside, and at every dinner, without once seeing it, I paid a little more of myself across that table and got nothing back but the chance to come again. I finally said something to Julian on the drive home one night. Not an accusation, just a small, careful, true thing. "Your mother doesn't like me," I said. He let out the tired sigh of a man who had been managing this exact weather his entire life. "She's like that with everyone," he said. "Give her time, she'll come around. Just don't give her anything to grab onto." I asked him what that was supposed to mean. "Don't give her anything to grab onto," he said. "You know. Don't make waves. Let her run the wedding. It's just easier." I looked out the window at the dark trees going by, and I felt something I did not yet have a name for. I had wanted him to say, "She is wrong about you, and I am going to make her stop." Instead, he had asked me to be quieter, to fold myself into a smaller shape, to hand his mother the wheel so the ride would stay smooth. And the terrible part, the part I could not even be angry at, was that I understood him completely. He had spent 38 years learning that the only way to survive Eleanor Sterling was to give her no edge to grip. He was not betraying me. He was teaching me the one survival skill he had. But I did not want to survive her. I wanted him to stand in front of me. He kept asking me to make myself smaller, and I kept doing it, and I kept calling it love. That night I lay awake in the dark, and finally let the thought finish itself all the way to the end. The man I was going to marry had never once, in 2 years, put himself between me and his family. He loved me in every quiet way there was. He just could not seem to do it out loud, where it would cost him anything. And I was beginning to wonder what was going to happen on the day. Quiet was no longer enough. Camilla invited me to coffee. "Just us girls," she said, "to get to know each other properly before the wedding." I should have known better. She arrived with a leather folder and a smile, and spent the first 10 minutes being warmer to me than she had ever been. Then the questions started, and they were not the questions of a woman getting to know a sister. Where did I live, exactly? Did I own the place or rent it? Julian mentioned you've got that truck. Is that for the work? How many people did I actually employ, roughly? Was it seasonal, the metal thing? Did it slow down in the winter? She was mapping me. Every answer disappeared into that folder behind her eyes, and I could watch her doing the arithmetic. The same arithmetic I had spent my whole life dodging. But it was running in the opposite direction from what I expected. She was not trying to find out how much I had. She was trying to confirm how little. She wanted to establish, on the record, that I was a woman with a truck and a seasonal trade and no family and no money. A woman who could only possibly be marrying Julian Sterling for one reason. So I gave her small, true, incomplete answers, and I watched her decide I was exactly the thing she had come to prove. Yeah, I said. Just the one truck. Just a small operation. We get by. I let her write the story she had already brought with her. I am not entirely sure why I did that. Part of it was the old armor, the lifelong reflex to look like less. But part of it was something colder and newer than the armor, a growing sense that I was being investigated, and that whatever these people were quietly building, I did not want them to know what I actually was, until I understood what it was for. I drove home certain of exactly one thing. That coffee had not been a welcome. It had been discovery. And discovery is the thing you do before a trial. I heard the word for the first time through a door I was not supposed to be standing behind. It was another dinner, and I had gone looking for a bathroom down a hallway I did not know, and I heard Eleanor's voice coming low and certain out of the study, the way she never let it sound in front of guests. "We need to protect what's left of this family," she was saying. Camilla answered something I could not make out. Then Eleanor again, clear as a struck bell. "She's after what's left, obviously. A gold digger, plain and simple. Some women see a name like ours, and they smell an opportunity from a mile off." I stood in that dark hallway, with my hand flat against the wall, and did not move a muscle. Gold digger. The two words sat down in my chest like a swallowed stone. I had spent my entire life so terrified of being wanted for my money that I had hidden it from everyone I ever loved. And here was a woman deciding I was a thief, over money I had never touched and did not need. But it was three other words she said that kept me frozen in that hallway. "What's left?" You do not say what's left about a full account. You say it about a draining one. You say it about a draining one. You say it about a draining one. That used to be deep. I turned it over and over, that strange, revealing little phrase, and for the first time since the day I had walked through their front door, I felt the ground shift under the whole story I had been told about the Sterlings. They had a name cut into stone downtown, and portraits in the county museum, and a lake house going soft and tired at the seams. And somewhere on the other side of that study door, the woman who ran it all was standing guard over what's left. I went back to the table. I smiled, and I took my seat, and very quietly, I started to pay a different kind of attention. I did not get angry. Anger is loud, and loud was exactly what they were hoping for. Loud would have proven their case. Instead, the next morning I did what any business owner with a working brain does the day she hears the word thief used about her by the family she is about to marry into. I called my attorney, not to attack anyone, to protect what I had built. I told her I was getting married, and I told her what I had overheard through that door, and she said the thing lawyers say that sounds ice cold right up until the moment you need it. "Nora," she said, "you have a company worth what yours is worth, and right now you have no protection on it at all. If you marry without it, you are handing a piece of your grandfather's life's work to strangers. We fix this before the wedding," she said, "not after. After is too late." So we started. We drew a clean, bright line around the business, kept it legally separate, on its own footing. We drafted a prenuptial agreement of my own, one that protected Vance Ironworks and my properties, and the accounts I had built, all the things I had made with that steel rose sitting on my windowsill, from anyone who might one day decide that what was mine had somehow become family property. I have watched too many women hand over everything they built just to keep a fragile peace, and I decided, sitting in that lawyer's office, that I was not going to be one more of them. If you have ever been made to feel greedy simply for wanting to keep the thing you made with your own hands, then you already understand the knot I was trying to untie. I signed nothing that morning. I just made sure that whatever the Sterlings were quietly building, I would not walk into the middle of it with empty hands and an open throat. I put my folder in a drawer at home, and I tried to forget it was there. I told myself I was being careful, not suspicious. I did not yet know I was going to need it. I did not yet know they were about to hand me the reason. I found out what what's left actually meant on a Saturday afternoon at the lake house, looking for a powder room and opening the wrong door. It was the study, Eleanor's private room. I stepped inside before I understood where I was, and the first thing I saw was the wall. There was a rectangle on it, a clean, bright rectangle in the middle of sun-faded wallpaper, the exact shape and size of a large painting that was no longer hanging there. I knew that shape. It is the ghost a picture leaves behind when it has hung in one spot for 40 years and then, suddenly, one day, has not. And once I saw the first one, I saw the others. Pale, clean wounds all around the room where things used to be. A display cabinet standing open and half empty, its felt shelves holding nothing but the dustless outlines of what had sat there. And on the desk, not hidden, just sitting out the way things sit out in a house where no guest is ever expected to wander, was a short stack of mail. The top envelope had a bank's logo in the corner, and a red stamp across the front that I could read from where I stood in the doorway. Past due. Under it, the corner of a glossy sheet was showing, the kind that auction houses send, the kind with a photograph of your own furniture on it, and I could read one printed word. Appraisal. I stood very still, and without deciding to, the way I always did when the ground under me was not steady, I closed my hand around the steel rose in my jacket pocket and held on. And the whole story turned over in my palm like a coin landing the other way up. They had not looked down on me because I had nothing. They had looked down on me because I had something, something real and growing and entirely mine. And they, behind the stone name and the pearls and the portraits, were quietly, desperately running out. The name over the old bank, the plaque on the hospital wing, all of it was a beautiful painted front on a house with nothing left inside. Eleanor was not protecting a fortune from a gold digger. She was hiding the fact that the fortune was already gone, and she needed a thief in the room so that not one of those 60 important people would ever think to look too closely at the empty vault. I backed out of that study and pulled the door shut behind me and stood in the hallway with my hand around Pop's rose, and for the first time in 2 years, I was not afraid of any of them. After that door, every insult I had swallowed changed its flavor in my mouth. The corrected glasses, the survey over coffee, the how practical over my ring. None of it had ever been about protecting a legacy. There was no legacy left to protect. It had all been about controlling the story inside the room, keeping every eye fixed on the poor, unsuitable woman Julian had dragged home, so that nobody would ever count the empty spaces on the walls. And the strangest thing happened to me, as I stood there understanding it. I stopped hating Eleanor, and I started, against my own will, to actually see her. Later that same afternoon, I passed the study again, and the door was cracked, and she was inside, alone. She had taken one of the empty frames down off the wall, and she was polishing it. The glass over nothing, her hands moving in small, careful circles, cleaning a frame that held only wallpaper now, and her hands were shaking. She did not know I could see her. She would have died on the spot before she let me see her like that. And standing there, watching a woman polish the glass over an empty rectangle, I understood something about her that I had not let myself understand before. 40 years ago, she had walked into this family exactly the way I was walking into it now. From somewhere with less, and they had measured her at the door too, and she had spent 4 decades since then learning to be a wall so smooth that nobody could ever get a grip on her the way somebody had once gotten a grip on her. She was not the author of the cruelty. She was its longest-serving employee. She was terrified. Of the red stamps, of the empty frames, of a town that still nodded at the name, and would stop the very day it learned the truth. I felt something I had absolutely not planned to feel, standing in that hallway. Not forgiveness, just recognition. She and I were far more alike than either one of us would ever have agreed to say out loud. The only real difference between us was this. She had a name, and no money. I had money, and no name. And one of us was still completely convinced that this made me the one who had shown up with nothing. You would think, knowing everything I now knew, that I would have walked out, that I would have looked at the empty frames and the shaking hands and the word gold digger, and simply taken my company and my dignity and gone. I did not. And I want to be honest with you about why, even though it is the part I am least proud of. I did not leave, because I still loved Julian, really loved him. The gentle man from the empty school who argued about a record until the janitor threw us both out into the cold. And because I still wanted the table. Even a table in a broke and frightened house, I still wanted a seat at it. Knowing they had nothing did not cure me of wanting them. It just changed what I was afraid of. So I made a decision, and it was the wrong one, and I made it anyway. I decided I would not use what I knew. I would not walk into a dinner and announce that I had seen the past due notices, that I knew the vault was empty, that the whole grand performance was being held up with pearls and nerve and nothing else. That would have been cruelty traded for cruelty, their own game handed back to them, and it would have won me nothing I actually wanted. I did not want to defeat Eleanor. God help me, I still wanted her to like me. So I kept the secret, and I kept my folder in its drawer, and I kept showing up a little smaller each time, still believing that if I was patient and good and quiet enough, the door would finally swing open on its own. The ultimatum arrived dressed up as a formality. Julian told me 3 weeks before the wedding, looking down at his own shoes the whole time. Mom thinks we should have a prenup, he said, just to make everyone comfortable. She's had Camilla's attorney draw something up. I asked to see it, and when it came, I read it twice, all the way through, to be certain I understood what I was holding in my hands. It was not a prenup in any fair sense of that word. It was a surrender, dressed in legal clothes. In the event of a divorce, I would walk away with nothing. Worse than nothing. The document defined everything I had brought into the marriage, my business, my properties, my grandfather's shop, all of it, as family property, held in trust by the Sterlings. And there was a second part clipped behind it, and this part was almost worse. A confidentiality agreement. A clause that said that in the event the marriage ended, I would never speak of the family, its affairs, or its finances, to anyone, ever, under penalty of losing everything all over again. Sign it, and disappear, and stay silent about what you saw. That was the deal, in plain black ink. And the insane, upside-down logic of the whole thing was this. They still thought I was poor. They genuinely believed Vance Ironworks was one truck and a slow winter. This entire crushing document had been built to protect a fortune that did not exist, from a fortune they were certain did not exist either. They were reaching across the table to seize assets they did not believe were real, from a woman they had decided was after theirs, which were also not real. The confidentiality clause was the only part that made any actual sense, and it only made sense once you knew what I knew. They did not need my silence to protect their money. They needed my silence to protect the fact that there was no money left to protect. It would have been almost funny, if it had not been aimed straight at the one true thing I had in this world. I sat with that document for a long time. I did not call my lawyer, not yet. I wanted to see how far they would take it, and more than that, I wanted to see whether the man I loved would take it there right alongside them. I put their document in the same drawer as mine, 2 folders, side by side, and I waited for the Sterlings to show me exactly who they were. I gave Julian his chance to be the man I had hoped he was. I laid their document flat on our own kitchen table, in the light, where he could not pretend not to see it, and I asked him one single question. Do you know what this actually says? He read it. I watched his face the whole time, waiting for the flush, the anger, the moment he would crumple it in his fist and say, "Absolutely not. You are not signing this. Over my dead body." That is not what happened. He read it, and he got quiet. And then he said the words that ended something between us that I am not sure ever fully grew back. "Just sign it," he said. "It's only paper. You and I both know we're never going to get divorced, so it doesn't actually matter what it says. Sign it, make her comfortable, and then we can finally just be happy." I looked at the man I loved across my own kitchen table, and I understood that he was asking me to sign my grandfather's shop away to make his mother comfortable, to hand over, on paper, everything I had ever forged with my own two hands, so that a woman who had called me a thief could feel, quietly, that she had won. "It's only paper," he said, the way people say things when they have never in their lives had to build anything, and so cannot imagine for 1 second what it feels like to lose it. It was not only paper to me. It was every morning I had gone into a cold shop before the sun came up. It was Pop's hands and the little forge behind the old building and a steel rose made out of somebody else's garbage. And the man who was supposed to stand in front of me had just, gently, kindly, asked me to lie down. I kept my voice level and my hands still. I told him I would think about it, and that night, finally and completely, I understood the thing I had been running from my entire life. Nobody was ever going to hand me a place at the table, not even him. That night I could not sleep, and so I did the thing I never let myself do. I looked straight at my own life without flinching. I saw a girl in half a rented duplex learning that the way to keep people was to need them, and never, ever to be a threat to them. I saw a young woman hiding her first real money like it was something shameful she had done. I saw myself paying for dinners and letting the flinch show on purpose, dressing down, keeping the rust on the truck, telling every single person I loved a version of myself that was smaller than the truth, so that they would have less reason to leave. And I saw exactly where all of it had brought me, to a kitchen table, at 36 years old, being asked to sign away the one thing I had never once made smaller, my company, in order to keep a family that had never, not for a single day, chosen me. The armor had not protected me. The armor was the wound. I had spent my whole life making myself small enough to be loved, and the smaller I made myself, the less of me there was left for anyone to actually love. So I made myself smaller still, feeding the very thing that was starving me. I had done it with friends. I had done it with the man who told me I made him feel small, and now I was doing it with the Sterlings, sanding myself down pedal by pedal to fit a chair in an empty house. My grandfather did not raise me to be small. He raised me to build. He wore his burns like a man wears medals, and somewhere along the way I had taken everything he gave me and hidden it on a windowsill, and then in a drawer, ashamed, as if worth were a thing you were supposed to apologize for having. I lay there in the dark, and for the first time in a very long time, I stopped apologizing. In the morning, I called my attorney, and this time it was different. The first time, I had called her out of fear, to build a wall. This time, I called her to do something quieter, and much harder to name. I asked her to prepare a full financial disclosure, everything. The real company valuation, the properties, the investment accounts, all of it, laid out plainly on paper, in order, for anyone who cared to read it. And I asked her to finalize my own prenuptial agreement, the fair one, the one that simply protected what I had built, and to put one clean page of plain legal fact at the very front of it. She asked me what I was planning to do with all of it. I told her the truth, which was that I did not entirely know yet. I only knew that I was done being the poor woman in a story that other people were writing about me. If there was going to be a document on a table, it was not going to be only theirs. My lawyer walked me through the law, calm and exact, and I wrote it all down like a student. A prenuptial agreement pushed on someone under pressure, without their own attorney in the room, without a full and honest disclosure of what both sides actually own, is not worth the paper it is printed on. It can be thrown straight out by a court. It protects no one. A real agreement, a fair one, requires both people to put their true numbers out in the open, with time to think, and their own counsel to advise them. Their document did none of those things. It was theater, and it was bad theater at that. I put my folder together. The disclosure, my own fair agreement, the single page of law at the front, and I set it by the door. I did not yet know whether I would open it. I only knew I was not going to walk in without it. Camilla let it slip, the way people let things slip when some part of them wants you to know, and cannot admit it. We were on the phone confirming numbers for the rehearsal dinner, and she mentioned, lightly, that it was going to be a full room. 60 people, All the important ones, she said. Everyone will be there to witness you joining the family. She smiled when she said it. I could hear the smile, and it had teeth in it. I hung up and sat with that one sentence for a long time. Witness you joining the family. 60 people. The important ones. And I understood, all at once, exactly what the rehearsal dinner was going to be. It was not a dinner, it was a stage. They were going to hand me that document in front of 60 of the oldest names in the county, at the precise moment when refusing to sign would look like the tantrum of an ungrateful gold digger who had been offered a seat she did not deserve and had the nerve to complain about the terms. They had chosen the audience on purpose. A woman alone at a kitchen table can say no, but a woman surrounded by 60 watching faces, one night before her own wedding, in front of the man she loves, and everyone he has ever known, that woman is supposed to be far too ashamed to refuse. Public was their weapon. Shame was the pen they intended to press into my hand. And sitting there with the phone still warm in my grip, I realized something that surprised me so much I said it out loud to my empty kitchen. Public could cut the other way too. If they wanted 60 witnesses, then 60 witnesses they would have. Just not to the thing they had so carefully planned. I want to be very clear about this next part, because it matters to how the whole thing ends. I did not decide to humiliate them. I decided only one thing, that whatever was going to happen in that room, it was finally going to happen in the light, and that I was going to walk in, for the first time in my life, at exactly my full size. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I sat alone at my kitchen table, with two things in front of me. My grandfather's steel rose, and the folder by the door. I did not write a speech. For once in my life, I did not rehearse being anybody at all. I just sat with the quiet, and I asked myself what I actually wanted, underneath the wanting to belong, underneath the 2 years of shrinking. And when the answer finally came, it was simple, and it cost me something to say, even to an empty room. I wanted to be able to look at myself, that was all. Not to win, not to destroy them, not even, anymore, to be let in. I wanted to be able to walk out of the next day, and still look the woman my grandfather raised in the eye. Everything I had done for 2 years had been a slow trade of that woman for a chair, and I was finished trading her away. I picked up the rose and held it in both hands, and I ran my thumb over the little hammer marks on the petals the way I had done 10,000 times, and I made myself a promise in his voice. Whatever happens tomorrow, I will not walk into that room as anyone smaller than I am. I did not know yet whether I would still marry Julian, that is the honest truth of it. I loved him, and I did not know. I did not know whether a man who could ask me to sign away my whole life to soothe his mother could ever learn to stand in front of me, instead of beside me while I bled. But I knew one thing with total bone-deep clarity, sitting there in the dark with the steel warm from my own hands. I was done auditioning. The part had never been mine to earn in the first place, and after 36 years, I was finally, completely, going to stop trying. The club was beautiful, in the way a stage set is beautiful, if you know where to look. And I knew now exactly where to look. The flowers on the tables were silk, not fresh, dressed up under the lighting so that most people would never notice. There were half as many staff working the room as a party that size should have had. The chandeliers had been dimmed to a warm, flattering gold that also, very conveniently, hid the worn patches in the carpet and the water stains spreading near the ceiling in the far corner. 60 of the oldest names in the county sat at the round tables in their good jewelry, and every last one of them believed they were dining in the house of old money. I knew better now. I knew the whole room was being held up by nerve and silk flowers, and a name cut into a building downtown that was a coffee shop now. Eleanor worked the room like it was the performance of her life, because it was. Radiant, gracious, touching elbows, calling people darling. Camilla orbited close around her, and at the far end of the head table sat Warren Sterling, Julian's father, a quiet man I had heard speak maybe a dozen full sentences in 2 years. He was watching me, not the way the others watched me, with the polite arithmetic. He was watching me the way you watch weather out over the water when you are not sure yet which way it is going to turn. And when our eyes met across that room, he did not look away. There was something in his face that was almost an apology he did not have the courage to say out loud. I took my seat. I set my small clutch in my lap, and folded flat inside my jacket was my folder. Their document was already on the table, tucked just under the edge of Eleanor's place setting, where she thought I could not see it, waiting for its moment. The steel rose was in my pocket, 60 people lifted their glasses, and I understood that the dinner had already begun, and that everyone in that room was about to get exactly what they came for, just not in the way a single one of them expected. It happened between the salad and the toast. Eleanor stood, tapped her glass with a spoon, and the room went soft and attentive, the way rooms do for a woman like her. She thanked everyone for coming. She said a few gracious words about family, about legacy, about the sacred importance of protecting what generations had built. And then, still smiling, still radiant, she reached under the edge of her place setting, and drew out the folded document, and she slid it slowly across the white tablecloth, until it came to rest directly in front of me. There's just one small family matter to see to first, she said, and her voice carried all the way to the back tables the way she had trained it to carry for 40 years. Nora, dear, before you join this family, we need you to sign this, and then disappear quietly, if it ever comes to that. She let a pause open up, and into that pause, so that not one of the 60 could possibly miss it, she said the thing she had been wanting to say to me for 2 full years. Sign it and disappear, gold digger. You brought nothing to this family. The room did not gasp, it did something worse. It went completely still. 60 of the oldest names in the county sat there with their forks stopped halfway up, their eyes all on me, and I could feel the verdict already forming on their faces. The old, easy, comfortable verdict about the woman with the truck and no family, who had reached too high and was finally being put back in her place. Julian had gone white beside me. Camilla was watching with the small, hungry stillness of someone who has waited a long time for a show to start. And Eleanor stood over me, gracious and merciless, holding out a pen. I looked down at the document on the tablecloth in front of me. Then I looked back up at her, and I did the one single thing she was not prepared for. I smiled, and I picked up the pen. I did not sign it. I read it out loud. Calmly, into the frozen silence of that room, I began to read their document to the 60 witnesses they had so thoughtfully assembled for me. In the event of the dissolution of the marriage, I read, the party of the second part shall relinquish all claim to assets, and shall convey any and all property, business interests, and holdings brought into the marriage to the Sterling Family Trust. I paused and I looked up. That's me, I said, the party of the second part. Everything I bring, signed over to your family, forever. I read on. And the party of the second part shall not disclose, discuss, or reveal any matter concerning the family's affairs or finances to any person. I looked up again. And I'm to disappear, I said, and never say a word about anything I've seen in your house. Is that right, Eleanor? Her smile flickered, just slightly, because this was not the script. In her version of this scene, I was supposed to be crying by now, or fleeing the room, or scrawling my name across the line in shame. Instead, I was reading her own weapon back to her, slowly, so that every important person she had invited could hear exactly what the gracious Sterlings were asking of the woman they had just called nothing. I kept the pen in my hand. I let them all watch me hold it over the signature line, and I felt the whole room lean in, 60 people certain they were about to watch a gold digger sign her own surrender. Julian whispered my name, half a plea, and half a warning. Eleanor's chin lifted in something that was almost triumph. And Warren, at the end of the table, set his glass down very carefully, as if he had seen something the rest of them had not yet noticed. I let the moment stretch until it was almost unbearable, the pen poised, the whole room holding its breath. It's a generous document, I said, quietly. It really does account for everything I'm bringing to this family. And then I set the pen down on the tablecloth, right next to their document, and I did not sign it. And into that confused, breathing silence, I reached inside my jacket and took out a plain manila folder, and I laid it on the table in front of me, next to theirs. There's just one thing this whole agreement is missing, I said. I opened my folder the way you open a door you have kept locked for a very long time. Without any hurry, because there was no longer any reason on earth to rush. I took out the first page and laid it face up on the tablecloth where the light could reach it. What it's missing, I said, is the other party's disclosure. A fair agreement shows both people's real numbers, so let me show you mine. And I began to read, still calm, still quiet. And the numbers filled that room the way water fills a low place, slowly, and then all at once. Vance Ironworks, I read, structural steel and custom fabrication, 90 employees, contracts in 4 counties, and then I read the valuation of my company, out loud, the real one, and somewhere behind me I heard a fork touch a plate and stop. I read the properties I owned outright. I read the investment accounts, one after another. I laid each page down as I finished it, face up, a plain paper trail of a life built by hand. And with every page I set down, the arithmetic in that room ran backward, and then it broke apart entirely. These were not the numbers of a gold digger with a truck. They were the numbers of a woman who could have bought the club, and the lake house, and the name carved over the old bank downtown, and still had enough left over to salt the roads all winter. You said I brought nothing to this family, I said, and I looked up at Eleanor, whose face had gone the exact color of the tablecloth. Let's all read together what nothing looks like, and at the end of the head table, Warren Sterling, the quiet man who was the only person in that entire room who actually knew what the family accounts truly held, put both his hands flat on the tablecloth and came halfway up out of his chair, staring at my pages. Because he understood, before anyone else in that room, exactly what those numbers meant. He understood that the woman his wife had just called nothing was the only solvent person sitting at that table. He understood, in one clean second, which family in this marriage had actually been the one marrying up. He came halfway up, and then he caught himself, and he sat back down very slowly, and he did not take his eyes off me for the rest of the night. Here is where they thought it was going to end. They thought I would slide my own knowledge across the table now, the way they had slid their document across it, and crush them with it in front of all 60 witnesses. The empty frames, the past due envelopes, the auction appraisal with the photograph of their own furniture on it, the shaking hands polishing glass over nothing. I could see it in Camilla's face, the flinch, the sudden understanding of what I could do to them in the next 30 seconds. It would have been easy, it would have even been fair. And it would have made me, finally and forever, exactly the thing they had spent 2 years insisting I was. Someone who came to that table to take. So I did not do it. I reached into my folder one last time and took out the final page. My own prenuptial agreement, the fair one, the one that protected everything I had built. And I did not read this one to the room. I simply laid it down on top of the others, and I said, quietly, so they had to lean in to hear it. I brought a document too. Mine only protects what I made from anyone who ever decides that what's mine has become theirs. I was going to sign it, and marry into this family anyway. Because I wanted to belong here more than I wanted to be safe. And then I stood up. I stood up in front of 60 of the oldest names in the county, at my own rehearsal dinner, and I set the pen down on the tablecloth for good. I'm not going to sign yours, Eleanor, I said. And I'm not going to marry your family. I never was. Then I turned to Julian, and I said the truest thing I had ever said out loud to another human being. I'll marry you at the courthouse on Tuesday morning, with nothing changing hands but a promise and no one's name on it but ours. Or I'll wish you a good life, and I'll go and build mine. But I am done earning a seat at a table that put a price tag on me the day I walked in. Choose right now, Julian. Not for her, for you. The room was so silent I could hear the ice settling in someone's glass 3 tables away. I had just given up the wedding I had dreamed of, the family I had folded myself smaller for 2 years to join, and quite possibly the man I loved, all in a single breath, standing on my own 2 feet. And I want you to understand something, because it is the whole reason I am telling you any of this. For the first time in my entire life, standing there having just let go of all of it, I felt exactly my full size. Julian stood up. For a long, terrible moment he just looked at his mother, and then he looked at me, And I watched 38 years of learning to be smooth go to war with something braver underneath it. And then he did a thing I had never once seen him do in 2 years. He walked around the table, past his mother's outstretched hand, past the pen still lying there on the white cloth, and he came and stood beside me, and he took my hand in front of every last one of them. And then he turned to Eleanor, and in a voice that shook and held anyway, he said, "You just showed me exactly who values what in this family." And Eleanor, who had run that room like a stage her entire life, finally lost the performance. Her composure cracked right down the middle, and the truth came out of her in a low hiss, meant only for me, but pitched just loud enough for the front tables to catch. "You have no idea," she said, "what it costs to keep this family's name alive." And for just 1 second, I did feel it. All of it. The 40 years. The empty frames. The shaking hands over the glass. A woman who had been measured at a door once too, and had never once stopped bleeding from it. I did not hate her, but I did not sit back down either. Warren caught my eye from the far end of the table, and the quiet man who had barely spoken in 2 years gave me the smallest nod. A quiet man's apology and his blessing, both at once, delivered in the only language he had left. And then he did something that surprised even me. He reached into his own jacket, and he took out a folded piece of paper of his own, and he set it down in front of his wife, face up, where she could see it. I did not know what it was that night. I found out later that it was a letter he had written to a lawyer 3 weeks before, quietly, without telling Eleanor. A letter beginning the process of selling the lake house honestly, on his own terms, before the bank could take it out from under them. He had been carrying it, waiting, the way I had been carrying my folder. He had just needed to see one person at that table stand up first. I picked up my folder and my grandfather's rose, and I walked out of that beautiful, dimly lit, silk-flowered room with my hand in Julian's, at my full size at last. We married on a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. I wore a simple gray dress, and my grandfather's steel rose was in my pocket the whole time. Julian wore his good coat, the one with the button that did not match. 2 of my crew stood as our witnesses, the men who had built my life alongside me, the ones Eleanor would have seen about the space for. There were no silk flowers and no 60 faces doing arithmetic. There was a clerk and a promise, and nothing at all changing hands but our 2 names on one plain certificate. But Warren came. He stood at the back of the little room, alone, the way he had watched me from across the head table. And afterward he took my hand in both of his rough old ones and held it for a moment. "We were the ones marrying up," he said, so quietly that only I could hear it. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it out loud. Eleanor did not come. I did not expect her to. And I found, standing in that plain, bright little room, that I did not need her to. The table I had spent 2 years trying to earn my way onto had turned out to be a stage in an empty house, and I had finally walked off it, into a marriage that had my full size in it, with room to spare. It was the smallest wedding in the history of the Sterling name. It was also, I think, the first honest one. The lake house sold that autumn, on Warren's terms, before the bank could make it ugly. The name stayed, carved over the old building downtown the way it always had been. But the town learned soon enough what had been hiding behind it, the way towns always do. I did not lift a single finger to save the Sterlings, and I did not lift a single finger to sink them either. I let them keep their name and their debt and their empty frames, and I stayed out of all of it, because their story was no longer mine to write. Vance Ironworks took on 2 more counties that year. Julian kept teaching music, and learned, slowly, how to stand in front of me, instead of beside me while I bled. We bought a house together, with money I had made with my own 2 hands, and we put both our names on the deed, separate and clear and honest. Everything out in the open, the way a fair agreement is supposed to be. He never once asked me to make myself smaller again, and I never once, inside that house, had to pretend to be anything less than exactly what my grandfather raised me to be. I hung the steel rose in my new office, mounted on the wall in the one spot where the morning light hits it first. Not hidden on a windowsill anymore. Not tucked away in a drawer. Not shameful, not small. Right out in the open, where anyone who comes in to talk business can see it. A little iron flower with a dead man's hammer mark still on the petals, worth more to me than every painting that ever hung on Eleanor Sterling's walls. Sometimes, early, before the crews roll out, I stand there and look at it, and I think about that clean, bright, empty rectangle on her study wall, the ghost of a thing she sold to keep a name alive, and I think about the thing I chose to hang up in its place. She spent her whole life defending a wall with nothing behind it. I spent most of mine ashamed of everything I had built with my own hands, and in the end, only one of us learned to put her worth up where the light could reach it. So here is the only lesson I took out of all of it, and I am going to give it to you plainly, because somebody watching needs to hear it said out loud tonight. Worth is not something you inherit at a table that somebody else set. It is something you forge, out of whatever they threw away, with your own two hands, and no one, no matter whose name is carved over the bank downtown, ever gets to slide it back across the tablecloth and call it nothing. That is my story. A folder I almost never opened, a pen I picked up, and then set down, and a name I finally, after 36 years, stopped trying to earn. If anyone has ever made you feel like you brought nothing to the table, go and count what you have built with your own two hands, and then count it out loud, tonight, where you can hear it. And if this story reached you, if it found the exact person it was meant for, then leave me those 3 words one more time, so I know you made it all the way to the end. Forged, not given. Share this with a woman who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the next one.